Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. And today's video I'm going to be reviewing my Peavey MiniMega Class D bass amplifier head. Now this amplifier has been around for a number of years. It's gone through a couple different revisions behind the scenes as far as production goes over at Peavey. This is made overseas in their China facility, but it is designed here in the United States. Now, I've been closely associated with Peavey for a number of years. I'm a bit of a fanboy at this point, but I will be providing my personal opinion about it. And also, I wanted to go over some of the technical features, how you would use it. There's been a couple questions on what does the Cosmos do, for example, what ohms can it handle, what's the ratings, things like that. How would you connect it? It's a very versatile amplifier. I would say this is more of a bass player's amplifier that if you really like to play around with the EQ, it's very tweakable, lack of a better term. But the amplifier is reasonably priced for us mere mortals, and given the weight, it's very portable. It's very easy to move around. And if you're looking for a ton of power, this is the amplifier for you. This is the larger bass amplifier that Peavey currently offers. They do make a slightly smaller head called the Mini Max version 2. And I say version 2 because it's got the gray buttons and the gray knobs, gray faceplate. It can do 600 watts at 4 ohms. The older version actually had the black color scheme and it was able to do 500 watts into 4 ohms. But I wound up going for the biggest one that they had available. And the weight is about the same between the two heads. And you get a couple different features, but at 9 pounds, this thing is very portable. All right, so let's talk wattage here. We are looking at 1,000 watts into 4 ohms. That's 1,000 watts consistent. That's if you were to run a constant signal through or RMS, this is capable of 1,000 watts. That's a lot of power for 9 pounds. You are also able to run at 8 ohms, which would then bring your wattage down slightly to 700 watts, which is still more than plenty for most gigs these days. Now, you cannot run a 2 ohm load. Now, a 2 ohm load is kind of an old hat these days. Most older amplifiers are capable of doing this, but the modern Class D lightweight amplifiers are simply not rated to go down that low. It's not a really stable load for Class D to run, and this amplifier is just simply not capable of doing that. If you try to run a 2 ohm load, and how you would get a 2 ohm load, you would connect a 4 ohm cab and another 4 ohm cab in parallel. That would give you 2 ohms. This amplifier would at the least shut down because it's overheating, or worst case would just simply give up the magic smoke. So do not run a 2 ohm load into this amplifier. It will just not be good for you. But wait, I have 2 4 ohm cabs. How do you get around that? Well, there is a cool way that I was able to research and figure that out. And without getting too technical, I actually run this Breakout Box. This Breakout Box basically takes the 2 speakers that I would normally run, and normally you can run these 2 cabinets in parallel. So a 4 ohm and a 4 ohm will give you a 2 ohm load that the amplifier sees. That's not going to work for this. But I can also run these in series, meaning I run one cabinet and wired it into the other, so it's one large loop. So each of these speakers are connected together, but now my ohms changes because of Ohm's law, and now I get an 8 ohm load in series, and that can certainly be driven by the MiniMega. Now, in the event that when you run cabs in series, for example, if one cabinet fails, then both cabinets are going to fail because it's no longer completing that circuit. Easy enough to do is that at that point, if one of the 4 ohm cabs fails, I switch to parallel. That one cab will now work, and the one that had failed will not, because obviously it's burnt out. But I can actually limp through a gig with one cab, which shouldn't be a problem at all. But that's the cool thing that I did a video on this a couple years ago, and there's some schematics, and very easy to put this together with a enclosure box, a few combo twist lock and 1/4 inch jacks. Very handy, and that's how I am able to run this amplifier with 2 4 ohm cabs. Here we are on back of the amplifier. I have this set up for 120 volts since I'm here in the United States. IEC connector, your fuse. The fuse is 10 amps slow blow. Although if you are running at 240 volts, then you will have to switch to a 5 amp slow blow depending on your voltage of where you are in the world. We have 2 parallel jack outputs here for the speakers. Or either can use the speak on twist locks, or you can use the 1/4-inch jack. That comes in really handy depending on the type of cab that you have. We have the aux in, which is a really cool feature. You can actually pipe in music from a source. In this case, I use my phone paired to a Bluetooth transmitter with the 3.5 millimeter jack, and I can play music through the amplifier as I'm trying to learn a song or rehearsal. So that comes in really handy. Over here is your DI out. This is an electronically balanced DI, not a transformer, so just keep that in mind. This is very quiet. I have not had any issues interfacing with the PA system. Most of the time you're going to use your XLR output right here. You could also use a balanced TRS, which is essentially the same thing. And normally this would be experiencing phantom power if you have that enabled at the front of the house PA mixer. This is isolated from that, so phantom power won't bother it. You can either select pre or post EQ. So pre is going to be out with the button is set out, and that'll pick up your signal right at the input. Post is right after the EQ before it goes to the power amp section. We have a pad. If this output is too hot, then you can press the pad for, I believe, either a 15 or a 20 dB reduction. That comes in handy. And then your ground lift switch. I have not had any buzzing issues with this, but if you ever needed a transformer isolation, then there are some external solutions if you were to have that type of problem, but most of the time you won't. This is a very quiet DI. The effects loop is after the EQ. Another technical note, the send is actually a buffered output. So this is going to send out to your effects board, and then the return does have a muting circuit, which is used, I think it's using 2 transistors, but it is not buffered. So the only thing that you would have to be aware of is that this, you don't want to run too long of a cable unless the output of your effects board is also buffered. So just keep that in mind. This is a single buffer on the send, but no buffer on the return. Finally, we have a buffered tuner out, meaning that this is going to prevent any, buffered means that it's actually got its own op amp here. It's not going to load down your inputs or anything like that to create noise. So that comes in handy. I've never really used this, although it's a nice feature to have. Finally, we have a 6-DIN connector here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, actually it's 7th. It's a 7-DIN connector, my apologies. And that will go out to the MIDI foot switch that is available for this amplifier head. So here I have the 5-button MIDI foot switch setup for the MiniMega. Now this foot switch is a little pricey. I think it was around $80, and I also think it's because this foot switch will work with multiple different amplifier heads, but the function for each of these switches are, the first switch will turn the crunch channel on and off, and you can see it turning on right here. The second button is for the compressor right here to turn that on and off. The third switch is for the Cosmos, and you can see it turning on right there. The fourth switch is interesting. This switch will actually engage or disengage the effects loop in the back. There's no indicator for it, but that's what it does. If you don't want to use your effects loop, you can turn it off here and bypass it. Finally, switch number 5 is the mute, and you can see how it turns off here. Here we are back at the front of the amplifier, and I've hooked up the speakers. So we have the 210 and then the 15. We have this set to series, and then the 3-foot cable or so goes back to the amplifier. So now the amplifier is going to see an 8 ohm load in series, and let's power it on. It's going to do its boot up sequence, and then once the inside is finished booting up, then the fan will turn on, and the fan is going to stay on like this even at idle. It will spin up faster as temperature demand increases, but I've never, in the time that I've had this amplifier, gotten that fan to spin up any faster than what you hear now. It's actually pretty quiet. Some may not like the fact that it's even running at all, but that is what is designed. These Class D amplifiers are very thermally efficient, and they are also very energy efficient, so there's very little wasted heat from the components because of its design. Unlike, say, a Class AB amplifier with a very heavy iron transformer inside, those things are not only heavy, but they also give off waste heat that is not converted to sound energy, so that's kind of the trade-off that you have. You do have to have some cooling capabilities, but that fan is pretty quiet. So after it's booted up, you're greeted by this really nice color scheme. It's going to cycle through the colors if there's nothing connected to the input. And probably the first question I'm going to get asked is, how do you turn those lights off? I don't like having those lights on. Very easy to do. So what you do, and if I can do this with one hand, you press and hold the crunch button, and then you're going to see the lights off, and then you can press the punch button. Now the lights are on. Now the lights are off. Now, if I let go, it's going to go back into that cycle. But once you connect a cable to your input, those backlights are going to be off, and that's not going to bother you at a gig or anything like that. I personally like having the lights on, so I usually leave them on. So here I just have a cable plugged in. These lights will always stay on, but this backlit where everything else is will be turned off. And again, you press and hold crunch, and then you press the punch light, and then all the backlights will come back on, or you can turn them off. You can then, while continuing to hold crunch, you can press enable, and you can actually go through the different color availability through the backlight. But I personally like to have these on, so I'll press and hold, and there you go. So now I have my blue background. Now you do have the ability, if you really just want to go and eliminate as much of the backlight as possible, you do have the ability to adjust the brightness. So if you press and hold crunch and then press bright, as you can see, there's 3 different settings for brightness, and I'm not really able to do it well because then the amplifier is going to push back, but you do have the ability to adjust the brightness. So press and hold crunch, and then you can change the brightness that way. Starting with the features in the front here, we have the pre-gain, and the pre-gain is got a wide range, usually active pickups for me. I'm here at, well, probably like 9 o'clock, maybe 10 o'clock. And then for passive pickups, I'm usually at 5, maybe 6 or 7, depending on how weak of an output. And below that is your crunch button. Now this crunch button is basically like a trans tube type of overdrive effect, but it's high pass filter. This only affects the higher frequencies. It does not affect the low frequencies, so you're going to retain that low end very clean. It's kind of like having a parallel overdrive where it's mixing the dry signal with the wet signal. And I will say that while that is a nice feature to have, I really don't like the sound of the crunch channel. Maybe some people might. It's not something for me. If I'm going to run an overdrive, I'm going to run an external pedal. But that is the feature that you have. This is also Footswitch capable of being controlled. The next feature we have is the compression. This is actually a very good compressor. It's an optical compressor. It can be enabled here, or it can be enabled on Footswitch number 2 on the Footswitch. Now, the interesting thing is that it's a single knob. The knob controls the compression ratio. The attack, release, and recovery times are fixed within the amplifier circuitry, so you can't adjust those. But say, for example, if I'm here at the minimum, I'm going to have a 2-to-1 compression, for example, and then I can go all the way up to probably something crazy like a 20 or 25-to-1 ratio there, or I think up to infinite. It's just, think of it as like elephant feet type. You're really crushing the dynamics of your playing if you have this all the way up. I will typically have it around 5, maybe even 4 or 3. I don't need that much compression, but it's great to be able to control your dynamics playing. It's a very usable compressor, and it's simple because it's only one button and one knob control. Talk a little bit about the EQ section, which you have your low, low mid, and high, and then you have your 4 buttons here. The punch is going to add an automatic 4 dB at around 100 hertz for that nice slap sound to really give it that nice thump attack on the bottom end. You also have your lows, which is the center frequency of around 100 hertz, 15 dB of active boost and cut, and that is going to be very helpful to dial in your sound. I'll skip over to the high frequency here. You have a bright switch, and then you also have the high potentiometer. Again, negative 15 and positive 15 dB of active boost or cut. The bright switch is going to add about 10 dB of boost at 8 kilohertz. Now that is going to add a lot of crispiness, and that's usually what I usually do. I'll keep these 2 on, but I'll keep these flat. That's really all I need for most of the gigs that I play. Now, here's where the magic sauce comes in for what this amplifier has been marketed for. You have the ability to adjust the center frequency of each of these ranges anywhere from 200 hertz all the way up to 800 hertz. And then again, 15 dB of boost and cut. We then have the high mids, which is more of a range of 800 hertz all the way up to 3.2 kilohertz. And again, negative 15 to positive 15 dB of cut. Now, what these narrow Qs do is that you have a wide frequency range of where you set the center frequency of, say, at 400, it's going to boost other frequencies in and around that. And if you don't want that to happen, you press this button and it'll actually take that Q or the width of that boost and then shrink it down. You can check out the manual for that, but this is if you really wanted to be surgical about your EQ here. I usually don't leave these on. I just want a little bit of boost up on the, say, the top end. You know, a little bit here goes a long way because of the 15 dB of boost and cut. And this is really where you can get into some serious tweaking and dialing in your sound exactly to the way you like it. And that is one of the main features of this amplifier, is that you have basically a two-band semi-parametric EQ. Very useful depending on the tone that you're going after. The next feature I'm going to talk about here is the Cosmos. There's two controls. You have the inner knob here, which is the C Psycho, and then you have the outer knob, which is the A Sub. I'll talk about the Psycho first because that seems to be where a lot of people are confused of what it actually does. And what it actually does, and this is the effect you need to be very careful with. The C Psycho is an effect that will actually add infrasonic frequencies to your playing, or basically frequencies below 20 hertz, below the level of human hearing. You're not going to hear this effect. You are going to feel the effect more than anything. I did a short on this a while back where you can actually see the speakers moving a lot more. The cone is moving a lot more because every time you pluck the string with your right hand, you're going to see those speakers respond a lot more with this effect turned on. Now, the problem that I find with this effect is that it's a little too much of this. You can actually not only get this amplifier to reach full power much faster, you're also going to potentially cause physical damage to your speakers too, because the speakers, while they're designed to move in and out a lot for a bass guitar speaker, too much, and you're actually going to cause physical damage to the speakers if you have this up too high. So just be careful with the C Psycho Cosmos control here. Now, the outer knob Cosmos is the A Sub. Now, this is a real treat to have in an amplifier at all, because most of the time I see a lot of bass players will actually use an octavider pedal, which is essentially what this effect is. It will add an octave below of whatever you're playing to your signal. And think of Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer. Tony Levin used this effect on that bass line. That's exactly what this head is capable of doing with this effect. So this outer knob will control that, and this is foot switch controllable as well. I believe it's foot control switch 3. And I don't really use the C Psycho as I mentioned, but this effect I use for certain tracks. So this will come in really handy on this particular amplifier. The last feature here on the face of the amplifier, that's a nice thing to have, but I think has been poorly implemented by Peavey, is the 3.5 millimeter output jack for the headphones. If you were to connect some headphones here, it'll disable the output to your speakers, which is expected. But I really think that they did not do a good job on this for two reasons. One, you see this jack is sunken below the faceplate here. So if you have a 3.5 millimeter and say, for example, you have an adapter like this that goes to a 1/4 inch, or your adapter has a larger barrel, it's not going to be able to fully engage with that jack, and you're going to run into problems. Now, I did get this adapter here where it does clear. It has a small enough barrel where it can actually engage the jack here, and then I have to convert it to a 1/4 inch to use with my studio headphones, and then I can run it that way. The other problem is that the op amp, it does not have enough power to drive a good set of studio headphones. So if you have some high impedance studio headphones, for example, that's really designed to reproduce bass accurately, you're going to find that the output volume is very weak on this output jack. So that's where I would say this is probably the most useless feature, unfortunately. Now, if you want to make it work, you can connect an external headphone amp to this jack, and then use that external headphone amp to drive some good quality studio headphones. And that's probably the best way to do it, but it's not something I often use anyway. You can use some cheaper headphones that have a lower impedance, which is, a sign of that it's not as good a quality, probably not going to reproduce bass as well. And I'm sure that the output volume would be more favorable, but this feature, I'm going to say that it's not the best. So I would even say, don't even think that it's there, because it's kind of useless. All right, guys, I'm going to end the video here. Just thank you so much for supporting the channel. I know I covered a lot of information on this amplifier. If there's anything specific that I missed that I haven't discussed, then please let me know. Probably the last parting note that I wanted to mention is the overall tone. Now, I didn't do any kind of sound demos or anything like that. There's quite a few videos out there already. Didn't see a lot of technical reviews, and if you watch my channel, you know that I like to get more into the actual gear and the nitty-gritty details. But the only other thing I wanted to discuss with this particular amplifier is its tone, and I would describe it as being very neutral. Nothing of, like, bass players always talk about color of the tone. Like if you play an SVT, it's going to have that particular tone. Peavey is known for having very neutral sounding amplifiers, meaning that they're not going to color the sound one way or another, but you really can dial in that kind of sound that you're looking for. It's known for very clean sounding amplifiers, not really a lot of dirt or gritty tones to it, for example. This amplifier would definitely fall in that category. I would say that this amplifier is more of a bass preamplifier with a PA type of power amp section, so very clear, very accurate reproduction. And again, you may not like it if you're really into tube valve amplifiers, for example, but if you're looking just for something that's nice, clean power, that's pretty straightforward to use, but has a very powerful EQ to shape your sound, then this is the head that you would want to have. But thanks again for watching, really appreciate it, and till the next video.